The billionaire had not planned this trip for anyone to notice. There were no cameras, no assistants, no bodyguards walking beside him. He arrived in the city the same way he used to years ago, quietly, alone, and without telling a single person who he really was. To the world, he was a powerful man whose name appeared in business magazines, but to this city, he was just another stranger walking through the streets at lunchtime. Years ago, this city was everything to him. This was where he had started with nothing but a small office, a broken desk, and a big dream. He remembered the days when he could barely afford lunch, when he would count coins before buying a sandwich. Now, he owned companies worth billions, but something inside him felt unfinished. Success had come fast, but peace had not followed. That was why he decided to return without warning, to see the truth with his own eyes. He dressed simply, wearing plain clothes and old shoes, the kind no one would look at twice. He wanted to blend in, to walk freely, to feel normal for once. As he stepped out of the car and onto the sidewalk, the noise of the city wrapped around him. People rushed past, holding phones, bags, and lunch boxes. No one recognized him. And that was exactly what he wanted. He walked slowly, taking in every detail. The tall buildings looked newer now, shinier, but the streets felt the same. The small shops were still there, some changed, some gone. He stopped for a moment and looked at a corner where his first office once stood. It was now a big glass building with his company's logo on it. Seeing it made him smile, but also made his chest feel heavy. He wondered if the people working inside knew the struggle behind those walls, or if they only saw success. The reason he came during lunchtime was simple. Lunchtime showed the real side of people. It was when workers were tired, hungry, and honest. It was when managers showed their true nature, and when small problems became visible. He believed that if something was wrong, it would show itself at this hour. And if everything was right, he would leave quietly, satisfied. As he walked, memories followed him like shadows. He remembered running through these streets with papers in his hands, chasing meetings, chasing hope. He remembered sitting on curbs eating cheap food, telling himself one day it would be worth it. Now, standing here again, he wondered if he had kept his promises, not to the world, but to himself. He entered a small restaurant near the old office area. It was busy, full of voices, clinking plates, and the smell of hot food. He sat in a corner where he could see everything. He ordered a simple meal, the same kind he used to eat years ago. The waiter barely noticed him, and that made him feel strangely comfortable. For the first time in a long while, he was not important. He was just another customer. As he waited, he watched the people around him. Office workers talked about deadlines, drivers ate quickly before returning to work, students laughed loudly. Life moved on, just as it always had. But as he looked closer, he noticed tired faces, worried eyes, and forced smiles. Something felt off, like the city was smiling on the outside but hurting inside. He took out his phone, not to check messages, but to remind himself why he was there. He had left this city trusting others to handle things, trusting systems and rules. But now he realized something important. Systems could look perfect on paper but fail in real life. And the only way to know the truth was to see it yourself. This unannounced return was not about checking profits or business numbers. It was about checking people. It was about seeing if the values he once believed in still existed. He wanted to know if his success had helped others or only himself. Sitting there, waiting for his food, he felt more nervous than he had before any big business deal. Because this time, the result mattered more than money. As lunchtime continued, the noise grew louder, and the restaurant became crowded. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, his eyes quietly observing, his mind open. He did not know yet what he was about to see, but he could feel that this visit would change something. He had come back unannounced, but fate was ready to announce the truth to him, whether he liked it or not. The restaurant looked smaller than he remembered, but it felt heavier, like the walls were holding stories that no one had spoken aloud in years. The billionaire stood near the entrance for a few seconds, letting his eyes adjust, letting his heart slow down. The smell of food hit him first, warm bread, fried onions, and something sweet he could not name. It pulled him back in time, to days when this place was his escape from worry, when a simple meal felt like a victory. He chose a seat near the window, not because it was comfortable, but because it allowed him to see both inside and outside at the same time. He liked that feeling, being in the middle of two worlds. Outside, the city rushed by, full of noise and movement. Inside, life moved slower, quieter, more real. He placed his hands on the table and noticed the scratches on the surface. They were old, made by people who had eaten here long before today. He wondered how many dreams had been shared over this table, how many disappointments swallowed with food. A waitress came over, her smile polite but tired. She handed him a menu without really looking at him. He didn't mind. In fact, he liked it. No special treatment, no fake respect. Just normal. He ordered the cheapest meal, the same one he used to order when money was tight. When she walked away, he watched her shoulders drop slightly, like she was carrying more weight than she should. The restaurant slowly filled up as lunchtime peaked. Office workers walked in, loosening their ties, checking their phones, complaining about bosses and deadlines. A group of construction workers sat at the back, laughing loudly, their hands rough and dusty. Two old men argued softly about politics near the counter. Everything felt alive, yet something felt wrong, like a song playing slightly out of tune. The billionaire's eyes moved carefully from table to table. He wasn't spying, just observing. This was the side of life he had missed while sitting in glass offices and flying private jets. Here, people were honest without trying to be. They spoke about money problems, family stress, rising prices. He heard a woman say she skipped breakfast to save money. He heard a man say his salary was late again. Each sentence hit him quietly, but deeply. When his food arrived, he didn't touch it immediately. He stared at the plate, remembering the hunger he once felt, not just for food, but for success. Back then, he believed that if he worked hard enough, everyone around him would rise with him. But now, sitting here, he began to question that belief. Maybe success had lifted him too far away from the ground, too far from the people he once stood beside. His eyes followed a young boy, maybe 10 years old, who walked in carrying a small bag. He stood near the counter, waiting. After a moment, a man handed him a packed meal. The boy thanked him and left quickly. The billionaire noticed the way the man watched the boy leave, concern written on his face. There were stories everywhere, silent and unseen, and he felt like he was seeing them for the first time. He finally took a bite of his food, and the taste surprised him. It was simple, but comforting. It tasted like effort, like someone cared. For a brief moment, he felt peace. Then he heard raised voices near the kitchen. Not loud enough for everyone to hear, but sharp enough to feel. A worker apologized repeatedly, and another voice answered coldly, without kindness. The room grew quieter for a second, then returned to normal, but the billionaire did not forget it. He leaned back, pretending to relax, but his mind was alert now. The restaurant was no longer just a place to eat. It was a mirror. It showed him what numbers and reports never could. He realized that while he was busy building an empire, cracks had formed underneath. Small ones, hidden ones, but dangerous ones. People often say that money shows the truth, but he now believed something else. Ordinary places showed the truth better. A small restaurant at lunchtime could tell more about a company's soul than 1,000 meetings. And as he looked around, he knew this visit was not a mistake. It was a warning, and also an opportunity. He finished his meal slowly, feeling the weight of every moment. This place had welcomed him when he was nothing, and now it was silently asking something from him. He didn't know exactly what he would do yet, but one thing was clear. This lunch was not just food. It was the beginning of a truth he could no longer ignore. The noise in the restaurant suddenly felt different, like the air itself had changed. At first, the billionaire thought he was imagining it, but then he noticed people were no longer talking as freely as before. Conversations became quieter, laughter faded, and eyes started avoiding the same corner near the kitchen. Something invisible was moving through the room, and everyone could feel it. He followed their gaze and saw a young man standing near the counter, holding a tray with shaking hands. His uniform was clean but old, and his face showed both fear and effort. He couldn't have been more than 22. In front of him stood the manager, a tall man with a hard voice and impatient eyes. The manager was not shouting, but his words were sharp, cutting through the air like a knife. "You messed up again," the manager said coldly, loud enough for others to hear but soft enough to sound normal. "If this happens one more time, don't come back tomorrow." The young man nodded again and again, whispering apologies. His hands trembled as he placed the tray down. The billionaire watched closely. The mistake looked small, maybe a wrong order or a delayed plate, but the punishment felt too heavy. This was not correction. This was control. The billionaire felt something tighten in his chest. He had seen this look before, years ago, on his own face when investors had spoken down to him, when he had been treated like nothing. He remembered how powerless he had felt back then, how small. And now, he was seeing the same thing happen to someone else, in a place connected to his own success. Around them, the customers pretended not to notice. Some stared at their phones, some looked at their food, some rushed to finish and leave. No one wanted trouble. No one wanted to be next. The billionaire understood this silence. It was the silence of survival. The manager walked away, and the young worker stood frozen for a moment. Then he picked up the tray and disappeared into the kitchen without looking at anyone. The room slowly returned to noise, but the feeling remained. It was like a crack in a mirror, still there even when you look away. The billionaire's mind started working fast. This restaurant belonged to a chain that his company now owned. Not directly, but through layers of management and contracts. On paper, everything looked perfect. Fair wages, proper rules, employee care. He remembered signing reports that said so. But paper did not speak. People did. He watched another worker rush between tables, her eyes tired, her steps fast. No one smiled naturally anymore. Even the food seemed to arrive with less care. It was clear now. This was not a happy place pretending to be busy. This was a stressed place pretending to be normal. He wondered how long this had been going on. Weeks? Months? Years? And how many times had he been told everything was fine? The thought made his stomach heavy. He had trusted systems instead of people. He had trusted reports instead of reality. A man at the table next to him leaned toward his friend and whispered, "They cut overtime again." The friend shook his head. "And they still want more work." They laughed, but there was no humor in it. Just tired acceptance. The billionaire looked down at his hands. These hands had signed deals worth millions. These hands had clapped in meetings when profits rose. And these same hands had never once checked how those profits were made. The truth hurt, but he did not look away. He called the waitress over gently. She looked nervous, like she expected trouble. He smiled kindly and asked, "Is it always this busy?" She hesitated. Then she nodded. "Always," she said softly. "But we manage." The words were simple, but her eyes told another story. They were the eyes of someone who had no choice but to manage. The billionaire thanked her, and she walked away quickly. He could see now that fear was the real manager here. Not the man near the kitchen, but the system that allowed him to act that way. For the first time since he entered the restaurant, he felt angry. Not loud anger, not dramatic anger, but a deep, quiet one. The kind that changes people. He had come back unannounced to remember the past, but instead, he was being shown the present, and it was not something he could ignore. He knew this moment mattered. This was the moment when a visitor becomes responsible. When a witness becomes part of the story. He had not seen the worst yet, but he had seen enough to know that something was broken. As he sat there, watching the kitchen door swing open and closed, one thought became clear in his mind. If he walked out now, he would be just another rich man who looked and did nothing. And he was no longer willing to be that man. The truth did not arrive all at once. It came slowly, in pieces, like a puzzle that refused to stay hidden any longer. The billionaire sat quietly, pretending to finish his meal, but his ears were now sharper than his eyes. Every word spoken around him felt important. Every whisper carried weight. He had stopped being a customer and had become a listener. Near the kitchen, two workers stood close together, speaking quickly, their voices low. He could not hear every word, but he heard enough. "Rent is due tomorrow," one said. "They cut my hours again." The other sighed. "At least you still have a job. My cousin was fired last week for asking about overtime." Their faces showed fear, not anger. Fear was stronger here. It kept people quiet. The billionaire felt a cold wave move through him. These were not lazy workers. These were people trying to survive. And yet, they were being treated like they were replaceable, like they did not matter. The worst part was not just the unfair treatment. It was the silence. Everyone knew. Everyone accepted it. That was the real problem. He leaned back slightly and noticed a small notice board near the kitchen door. It had old papers pinned to it, some falling off. One paper caught his eye. It was a schedule, with names crossed out and rewritten in pen. Shifts had been changed again and again. No stability. No warning. Just control. His mind connected the dots. When hours were cut, wages dropped. When wages dropped, fear grew. And when fear grew, people stopped speaking. This was not an accident. This was a system. A system that made profit easier by breaking people quietly. He remembered the promises he had made when he first built his company. Fairness. Opportunity. Respect. These words were printed on walls and websites, but they were not living here. They had become decorations, empty and silent. A man sat down at the table beside him, rubbing his forehead. He spoke to no one in particular. "They say the company is making more money than ever," he said, his voice tired. "But somehow we're making less." The man laughed once, bitterly, and stood up to leave. That laugh stayed with the billionaire longer than any speech. The billionaire looked around the restaurant again, but now he was seeing it differently. The busy tables were not signs of success. They were signs of pressure. The fast service was not efficiency. It was fear. The quiet obedience was not discipline. It was exhaustion. He felt ashamed. Not because he was rich, but because he had been absent. He had left and assumed things would stay right without him. He had trusted titles, managers, and numbers. He had forgotten the most important part, people. As he stood to pay his bill, he noticed something else. A small box near the counter labeled, "Tips for Staff." It was almost empty. The waitress thanked him softly when he dropped money inside, like she did not expect kindness anymore. That hurt more than anything else. He walked slowly toward the door, but stopped when he heard a voice behind him. "Sir, your change." The young worker from earlier stood there, holding a few coins. His eyes were careful, unsure. The billionaire smiled gently and pushed the coins back toward him. "Keep it," he said. The young man froze, then nodded quickly, his eyes shining for just a second before looking away. That small moment felt bigger than any business deal. Outside, the city noise hit him again, but he did not move. He stood there, staring at the door of the restaurant like it was a mirror. What he had seen inside could not be unseen. This was not just about one place. If it was happening here, it was happening elsewhere too. He took out his phone, not to call anyone yet, but to feel its weight in his hand. Power had always felt light to him, easy. But now, it felt heavy. Responsibility always did. The hidden truth was clear now. His company had grown, but its heart had shrunk. The system he built was working, but not for everyone. And the worst part was, no one had told him because everyone was afraid to speak. As he finally walked away, he knew this part of the story was over. The time for watching was ending. The time for action was coming. And the next time he returned to this place, it would not be as a quiet stranger. It would be as a man ready to fix what he had allowed to break. He did not act immediately. That surprised even himself. Every part of him wanted to turn back, reveal who he was, and end the injustice in one strong move. But something held him back. He knew sudden power could scare people, and fear was already everywhere. If he wanted the truth, real truth, he needed to see how people behaved when they thought no one important was watching. So he decided to stay silent and test the system. The next day, he returned at lunchtime again, wearing the same simple clothes, walking in the same quiet way. The staff barely noticed him, but he noticed everything. This time, he sat at a different table. He ordered something small and waited. His eyes moved slowly, carefully, like a man reading between lines. He started asking simple questions. Not important ones, not dangerous ones. Just small, normal questions. How long have you worked here? Is it always this busy? Do you get breaks? Some workers answered quickly and looked away. Some smiled and changed the subject. Some hesitated, their eyes checking the manager before they spoke. That hesitation told him more than words ever could. The young worker from before served him again. His hands were steadier today, but his eyes were still tired. When the billionaire thanked him, the boy looked surprised, like kindness was something rare. That moment broke something inside the billionaire. He realized how long it had been since he had thanked the people at the bottom of his company. Titles had separated him from humanity. He noticed something else. When the manager was nearby, everyone moved faster, quieter, smaller. When the manager left the room, shoulders relaxed, voices returned, smiles appeared. Fear had a face here, and it wore a name badge. At one point, the billionaire purposely sent his food back, politely, for a small reason. He wanted to see what would happen. The waitress's face turned pale, and she whispered apologies again and again. He quickly told her it was fine, but the fear did not leave her eyes. He watched her walk to the kitchen like someone walking to punishment. That was all he needed to see. This was not service. This was survival. He tipped extra, but quietly, slipping the money under the plate so no one would see. He watched her find it later, her eyes filling with tears she tried to hide. No one should feel that grateful for basic respect. That was when he knew this system was broken beyond simple mistakes. Over the next few days, he returned again and again, always unannounced, always silent. He visited different locations owned by the same chain. The story was the same everywhere. Overworked staff. Cut hours. Strict managers. Smiles that disappeared the moment customers turned away. The problem was not one person. It was a culture. He began writing notes in a small notebook. Names. Times. Words. He wrote down how long people worked, how often they rested, how managers spoke. These notes mattered more than any report he had ever read. This was the real audit. The human one. One afternoon, he sat outside watching workers take their breaks. Some ate quickly, standing. Some stayed inside because they were afraid to leave. Some worked through their break entirely. No one complained. Complaining was dangerous. Silence was safer. He felt anger again, but this time it was different. It was calm. Controlled. Ready. He was no longer confused. He was no longer guessing. He had proof, not on paper, but in his heart and mind. The silent test was over. The system had failed every time. And now, it was his turn to speak. That evening, sitting alone in his hotel room, he opened his laptop and looked at the company structure. So many layers. So many names. So many people hiding behind titles. He smiled, not with happiness, but with certainty. He finally understood what needed to be done. The billionaire closed the laptop and leaned back. Tomorrow, he would stop being invisible. Tomorrow, the test would end. And the people who thought no one was watching were about to learn something important. Power was not in money. It was in presence. And tomorrow, his presence would be impossible to ignore. The restaurant was louder than usual that day, but the billionaire felt calm for the first time since he returned. He walked in slowly, dressed the same way as before, yet everything felt different. This time, he was not here to watch. He was here to end the silence. He sat down, ordered his food, and waited. The manager was near the counter, giving instructions, his voice sharp, his posture proud. The staff moved quickly, eyes down, fear hidden behind polite smiles. The billionaire watched for a few minutes, then stood up. His heart beat once, strong and steady, and he walked toward the counter. "Excuse me," he said softly. The manager turned, clearly annoyed. "Yes." His voice was not kind. "I have a question," the billionaire said calmly. "How long do your workers usually stand without breaks?" The manager frowned. "Sir, we are busy right now. If you have a complaint, talk to the staff." The billionaire smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. It was a patient one. "I am talking to you." The manager crossed his arms. "We follow company rules." The billionaire nodded slowly. "Good. Then tell me why those rules are not written anywhere in this restaurant." Silence fell like a curtain. A few customers looked up. The staff froze. The manager's face changed, just slightly, but enough. "Who are you?" he asked. The billionaire reached into his pocket and placed a simple card on the counter. No gold, no design, just a name. The manager's eyes dropped to the card, and his face lost color. He read the name twice, then looked up, his mouth opening but no words coming out. The room went completely quiet. "I asked a question," the billionaire said gently. "Now I want answers." The manager stepped back. His voice shook. "Sir, we were just trying to meet targets." "Targets," the billionaire repeated. "And what did you destroy to meet them?" No one spoke. The billionaire turned to the staff. "How many of you lost hours this month?" Slowly, hands went up. "How many were threatened for mistakes?" More hands rose. "How many are afraid to speak?" Every hand went up. The truth stood in the air, heavy and undeniable. The manager tried to speak again, but the billionaire raised his hand. "Enough. You had time to fix this. You chose not to." He turned to the customers. "I am sorry you had to see this. This should have never happened." Then he looked back at the staff. "And I am sorry I was not here sooner." Tears appeared in the eyes of the waitress. The young worker from before stared at the floor, shaking. The billionaire walked closer to them, not as a boss, but as a human. "You deserve respect," he said. "And you will get it." He pulled out his phone and made a call, right there, in front of everyone. "I want HR, legal, and operations here today. All of them." He ended the call and looked at the manager. "You are done. Hand in your keys." The manager's shoulders dropped. He nodded, defeated, and walked away. The billionaire turned to the staff again. "Today, you go home early. Paid. Tomorrow, we rebuild this place the right way. No one moved. They were too shocked to believe him. He smiled softly. Go. Slowly, like people waking from a dream, they began to leave. Some cried. Some laughed. Some whispered prayers. The restaurant emptied, leaving only the billionaire standing in the middle of the room. He looked around, feeling the weight lift from the walls. For the first time since he returned, the place felt lighter. The confrontation was over. But the change had just begun. The day after the confrontation, the atmosphere in the restaurant was completely different. It was still busy with the lunchtime rush, but the tension that had weighed down the room for years was gone. Staff moved with confidence, customers smiled at their servers, and even the smells of the kitchen seemed warmer somehow. The billionaire had left a mark, but he knew real change required more than just one dramatic moment. He was determined to fix what had been broken at its roots. He returned quietly in the morning, dressed simply, observing how things ran without making a sound. The young worker from before greeted him nervously but with something new in his eyes, a spark of hope. The staff no longer flinched when the manager passed by because the manager who had caused so much fear was gone. In his place, a new manager had been assigned, someone chosen for integrity rather than authority. It was a small but crucial step. The billionaire walked through the kitchen, noticing the energy shift immediately. Workers were speaking freely to each other, joking quietly, and moving with ease instead of fear. He watched one employee take a proper break without glancing nervously over her shoulder. He realized that for years, fear had been controlling everything: production, morale, even the small smiles of those who were quietly suffering. Now, he could see relief spreading, like sunlight through a dark room. He pulled out a notebook, jotting down notes as he observed the staff. Every suggestion, every concern, every small smile or frown mattered. This wasn't about profits anymore, it was about people. He instructed HR to meet with the workers, not just to hear complaints, but to actively involve them in creating a fairer schedule and healthier workplace culture. He made it clear that no decision would be implemented without their voices being considered. Over the next hour, he walked among the staff, quietly asking about their experiences, listening without interrupting. He discovered small injustices, missed overtime payments, denied days off, unfair task assignments, but also learned about hidden strengths. One young woman was skilled in organizing deliveries efficiently but had never been recognized. Another worker suggested a new system to handle orders that would make the lunch rush smoother and less stressful. Every suggestion was written down and promised action. Then, as he prepared to leave, he turned to the staff. "This place is no longer about fear," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It's about respect. About fairness. About doing your work knowing that you are valued. I will not allow anything to return to the way it was before." His words sank in slowly, the weight of them clear in every face. It was a promise, not a threat. Later that day, he called the company's executive team. "We are changing policies, starting today," he said. "No one will be punished for doing their job. No one will lose hours unfairly. Every employee will be heard. If our company cannot protect our people, we are failing at the most basic level. I don't want excuses. I want solutions." The executives, stunned at first, realized he meant every word. By the end of the week, the changes were visible. Staff schedules were more organized and fair, wages were corrected, and workers began to feel pride in their work again. The young worker smiled when he passed by, the first genuine smile in years. The billionaire watched quietly, a sense of satisfaction building within him, not the satisfaction of power or wealth, but the satisfaction of restoring dignity. As he left the restaurant that evening, he looked back one last time. The building felt lighter, the laughter of workers audible even from the street. He realized the lesson was larger than this one place. Leadership was not about commands or numbers, it was about presence, observation, and action. By showing up, by seeing the truth, and by acting decisively, he had created something that money alone could never buy: trust, respect, and hope. The billionaire knew this was only the beginning. Change had started in one restaurant, but it could ripple outward, transforming the entire organization. For the first time in years, he felt that his success was truly meaningful, not because of wealth, but because of the lives he could touch and improve. The lunch that began as a quiet visit had turned into a powerful lesson in justice, humanity, and leadership. And for the workers, this was more than a correction. It was proof that someone truly cared, proof that their voices mattered, and proof that even a system built on fear could be reshaped by courage and empathy. The lunch hour had long ended, and the city streets outside were busy with the usual clamor of traffic, chatter, and footsteps, but inside the restaurant, a quiet calm had settled. The billionaire sat at the corner table, his food long finished, his coffee barely touched. He wasn't here for the meal anymore. He was here to observe the final ripple of change he had set in motion, to witness the effect of one person choosing to act, not from obligation, but from conscience. The staff moved around with a new energy. Laughter had returned softly, genuine and light, filling corners that had once been weighed down by fear. Even the smallest gestures, a smile to a colleague, a nod of acknowledgement, seemed amplified, as if everyone could sense that the rules had shifted, not just in writing but in the very air. The young worker, once so tense he trembled with every task, carried plates with confidence now, his head held high. He no longer looked at the manager with caution, but with quiet pride in his own work. The billionaire reflected on what he had learned. Leadership was not about power. It was not about numbers, or titles, or the way things looked on a financial statement. True leadership was presence. It was paying attention when no one expected you to, noticing the invisible suffering, and taking responsibility to make it right. Money could build walls and offices, but only human action could rebuild trust and dignity. He watched a waitress carefully place a tray in front of a customer, then glanced toward the kitchen with a soft smile. He knew that for years, this small kindness would have been suppressed, hidden behind fear. Now it flowed naturally, without instruction, without reward, because respect had been restored. He realized that changing a system did not require force or threats, it required honesty, courage, and the willingness to confront the truth, even when it was uncomfortable. Outside, the city moved as it always had, unaware that transformation had occurred in a single restaurant. But inside, a silent revolution had taken place. The workers had begun to understand that they were not powerless, that even small voices mattered. The manager, removed from his position, was replaced with someone who understood the value of integrity. Policies had been rewritten, schedules corrected, and fairness became the new rule, not an afterthought. The billionaire took a deep breath. He had come seeking a reminder of the city he once knew, a moment of nostalgia. What he found instead was a responsibility he could not ignore. The lunch that had begun as a quiet visit, just to observe, had turned into a turning point, not just for the restaurant, but for himself. He realized that success measured only in wealth was meaningless if it ignored the lives it touched along the way. He stood to leave, his movements calm, deliberate. He did not need applause or gratitude, the change itself was reward enough. The staff waved shyly, some unable to speak, others simply smiling. He nodded in return, a silent acknowledgement of their resilience, courage, and humanity. He knew that this moment would linger in their minds and hearts far longer than any memo or meeting could. As he stepped out into the afternoon sun, he looked back one final time. The building seemed brighter, lighter. Inside, ordinary people were working with pride, dignity, and hope. And in that, he saw the real value of his return. True impact was not made in boardrooms or press releases. It was made in quiet observation, in confronting uncomfortable truths, and in acting decisively to protect what was human, honest, and fair. Walking down the busy street, he understood something he had long forgotten: power is fleeting, but kindness, integrity, and courage ripple outward endlessly. One lunch, one visit, one decision to pay attention, had altered lives forever. And for the billionaire, that was more valuable than any deal he had ever made, more important than any number in an account. He had returned unannounced, but he left having seen, and shaped, the real story of what mattered most: humanity, respect, and the invisible threads that hold people together in the face of hardship. The city carried on, unaware of the lesson learned within those walls, but for those inside, nothing would ever be the same. And the billionaire walked on, quietly satisfied, knowing that true leadership was not inherited, bought, or announced. It was shown, one human action at a time.